The smirk that cost him everything. He walked into my courtroom like he owned it. Slow steps, chin up, that particular kind of loose confidence that only comes from decades of being treated like the rules apply to everyone else. He sat down, crossed one leg over the other, and looked at me, actually looked at me, with a smirk so comfortable on his face that I could tell he had been wearing it his whole life. I looked back at him, steady, quiet, and in that moment, before a single word had been spoken, I already knew two things. I knew who he was, and I knew who was sitting across from him. A young woman gripping a medical file with both hands, trying to hold herself together in a room that felt much too large for what she had already been through. I also knew something else, something he did not know I knew. The microphone above the incident had been recording. If you believe that no amount of fame, money, or arrogance should protect someone from basic human accountability, please subscribe right now. Because what happened in my courtroom that day is a story I think every single one of you needs to hear. His name was Grant Harlow. He was a well-known television personality, the kind of man whose face people recognized in airports. Confident, quick-witted, used to the warmth of cameras and the deference of people who wanted something from him. He had spent 20 years in front of audiences, 20 years of people laughing at his jokes, applauding his opinions, treating his moods as weather to be predicted and accommodated. In his world, he was the center of gravity. Everyone else orbited. He walked into my courtroom expecting that to continue. And the woman sitting across from him was named Maya Collins, 29 years old, freelance makeup artist, single mother to a 7-year-old boy named Caleb, who was missing his 2 front teeth and who had asked his mother that morning in the car on the way to the courthouse if she was going to be okay. She had told him yes. She had said it firmly, the way mothers say difficult things to children, with enough conviction to make the child believe it, even when the mother is not entirely sure herself. Maya had been working in the industry for 6 years. She was good at her job. Careful, fast, professional, the kind of person who arrived early and stayed late and never complained because complaining was a luxury she could not afford. She had built a modest client list through pure reliability. In a field full of personalities, she was the one producers called when they needed someone who would simply get the work done without drama. She had never worked with Grant Harlow before the day everything changed. She hoped she never would again. It was a Tuesday morning, 7 weeks before the hearing. Maya had arrived at the studio at 6:30. She set up her station, organized her kit, reviewed the day's schedule. When the assistant director pulled her aside and said, "You'll be handling Grant Harlow today. Just keep things smooth," she nodded. She always nodded. She knew what smooth meant. It meant patient. It meant quiet. It meant absorbing whatever energy the talent brought into the chair and not reacting to it. Harlow arrived 40 minutes late. He came through the door already irritated, muttering about traffic, about the script changes, about the temperature of the room. His energy filled the space before his voice did. Crew members shifted without being asked. People made themselves smaller around him, the way people do around a fire that might spread. Maya approached him calmly. "Good morning, Mr. Harlow. If you'd like to take a seat, I can get your foundation done quickly and we'll have you camera ready in 10 minutes. He looked at her the way some people look at background furniture. "I'll sit when I'm ready," he said. She nodded. "Of course, whenever you're ready." She waited. She was good at waiting. 2 minutes passed. He was still standing, scrolling his phone, talking to no one in particular about a scene he found poorly written. Maya stood quietly with her brush in hand, professional, patient, invisible the way her job sometimes required her to be. Then the director appeared at the door. "Grant, we need to start camera tests in 8 minutes." Harlow looked up and, as if suddenly remembering Maya was there, moved toward the chair with an air of doing everyone a favor. He sat down heavily. Maya stepped forward. "I just need to blend your—" "Don't tell me what you need," he said sharply, cutting her off. "Just do it." She said nothing. She began working. And then, with no warning and no reason she could see, he swatted her hand. Not lightly, not accidentally. He swung his arm sideways with the casual violence of someone who had never once in his life been told that his hands were not allowed to do whatever they wanted. Her wrist caught the metal bar of the lighting stand beside her. The pain was immediate and blinding, a hot electric crack that shot up her arm and nearly buckled her knees. She gasped. Her brush fell. She stumbled backward, grabbing the edge of a table to keep herself upright. The room went quiet. Harlow looked at her with barely concealed irritation. "Watch where you're standing," he said. And then, as she stood there holding her wrist, her eyes filling with tears, she was determined not to let fall. He added the words that would later echo in my courtroom. "You're lucky you're even on this set. People in your position don't usually get this kind of work." Then he stood up, said he was getting coffee, and walked out. Maya held her wrist against her chest and stared at the floor until she was certain her legs would carry her. Then she walked to her car, sat in the driver's seat, and let herself cry for exactly 4 minutes. She set a timer. She had to pick up Caleb at 3. The hospital confirmed what she already knew: severe sprain, ligament damage, 6 weeks minimum recovery, no lifting, no fine motor work. In her line of work, that was not an injury. That was a shutdown. She had no paid leave, no safety net, no backup income. Her savings lasted 11 days. Then the bills started going unpaid, one by one, in the order of what could wait longest. She reached out to Harlow's team, quietly, respectfully, simply asking for the income she had lost and the medical costs she had not expected to carry. The response came from a publicist. It said that her account of events was inaccurate, that the incident was a minor miscommunication, that any further discussion of the matter could be considered damaging to her client's reputation, and she was advised to stop. That letter, 3 short paragraphs of polished intimidation, was what turned a woman who hated conflict into a woman who walked into a courthouse and filed a claim. Not for revenge, not for drama, for Caleb's school fees and the electricity bill and the brake pads on her car that still made that grinding sound. When I received the file, I read everything. I read the medical report. I read the witness statements from 3 crew members who had been present. I read the publicist's letter. I read Maya's own carefully written account of the morning, composed in simple, direct language that had the particular rhythm of someone telling the truth. No embellishment, no drama, just the sequence of events as they happened. And then my producer told me that the studio's overhead boom microphone had been active during the altercation. I listened to the recording once. Then I requested it be prepared for the hearing. Then I closed the file, went home, and slept well, because I already knew what I needed to know. Harlow arrived to my courtroom the way I expected, late by 7 minutes, smirking the way men smirk when they believe the situation is already resolved in their favor. He nodded at the camera operator like they were colleagues. He settled into his chair with the loose-limbed ease of a man at a dinner party. Maya arrived 4 minutes before him. She sat down carefully, placed her folder on the table with both hands, and looked straight ahead. I watched them both, and I began. I asked Maya to present her account first. She spoke quietly, with the precision of someone who had rehearsed not the performance of it, but the accuracy of it. She described each moment with care. She did not exaggerate. She did not reach for emotional language. She simply told me what happened, in order, from beginning to end. Harlow reacted throughout, not loudly, he was too seasoned for that, but with small, performed gestures of disbelief, a slow headshake, a quiet exhale through his nose, the micro-expressions of a man communicating to any watching audience that he found what he was hearing mildly absurd. I let him do it. When Maya finished, I turned to him. "Mr. Harlow," I said, "your account, please." He stood. He actually stood, as though addressing a larger room than the one he was in. He spoke fluently, with the rhythms of someone accustomed to holding attention. He described a chaotic set, an accidental brush of hands, a woman who had unfortunately lost her balance. He was sympathetic in tone, almost warm. He said he hoped Maya had recovered and that he bore her no ill will. He said it all very well. And then he made the mistake. "I want to be clear," he said, squaring his shoulders. "I did not put my hands on her. There was no contact. None." I let that sit for a moment. "You are stating under oath," I said, "that you did not make physical contact with Ms. Collins at any point during that interaction." "Correct," he said. "Zero contact." I nodded slowly. "Then I'd like to play something for the court," I said. I pressed the button. His voice filled the room. The sharpness of it. The dismissive instruction not to tell him what to do. The sound, clean and unmistakable on the recording, of the impact. Maya's gasp, the clatter of her brush on the floor, her small, controlled cry of pain. And then his voice again, cool and indifferent, telling her she was lucky to be there. I stopped the recording. The courtroom was completely still. I looked at him. Grant Harlow was no longer standing easily. His weight had shifted. The smirk was gone. In its place was the expression I have seen many times over many years, the expression of a person who has just heard the door close behind them. "Mr. Harlow," I said quietly, "I'll ask you again. Did you make physical contact with Miss Collins?" A long pause. "I may have," he said slowly. "I may have brushed her hand away." "You may have," I repeated. "Yes, you may have brushed her hand away with enough force that she fell backward, struck a lightning stand, and sustained a wrist injury severe enough to take her off work for 6 weeks." He looked at the table. "I didn't intend for her to fall. Intention," I said, "does not determine impact. The injury is documented. The medical report is in my hand. The sound of it is in this room. What you intended changes nothing about what happened to her." He said nothing. "Had the recording also captured what you said to her afterward," I continued, "while she was standing there holding her injured wrist? You told her she was lucky to be working on a set like that. You told her that people in her position don't usually get that kind of opportunity." Maya was looking at the table. I could see the rise and fall of her breathing. I set down the recorder. "Mr. Harlow," I said, "let me tell you what I see in this file. I see a woman who arrived early, set up her station, and was doing her job with complete professionalism. I see a man who arrived late and irritated and took that irritation out on the nearest person who could not push back. I see an injury, 6 weeks of lost income, a stack of unpaid bills, a 7-year-old boy who asked his mother this morning if she was going to be okay." Harlow blinked. I had not planned to mention Caleb, but I had read it in Maya's intake notes, and I thought the room needed to hear it. I thought he needed to hear it. "She had to answer that question," I said, "because of what you did on that set, because you decided your frustration that morning was more important than another person's safety." Harlow's jaw worked silently. "And then," I continued, "when she reached out to your team, not with a lawsuit, not with a press statement, just with a quiet request for the costs she had incurred, your publicist sent her a letter threatening her for speaking about it." I held up the letter. "This document," I said, "is an attempt to use your professional weight to silence a woman with far less of it. That is not a legal defense. That is intimidation." I have been asked whether I felt anything in that moment, whether there was satisfaction in watching someone like Grant Harlow lose the composure he walked in wearing. The honest answer is no, not satisfaction. What I felt was something quieter and more serious than that. I felt the weight of what it had cost Maya to sit in that chair. The weeks of fear, the careful, sleepless preparation, the drive to the courthouse that morning with her son asking if she would be okay, the months of financial pressure and professional silence, and the constant calculation of whether pursuing the truth was worth what it cost. That is what I felt, and I wanted the verdict to be equal to that weight. I awarded Maya $47,000, medical costs, documented. Lost wages, calculated week by week from her booking records. Emotional distress, because what was done to her was not only physical. And a conduct penalty, because the letter his team sent her had been designed specifically to prevent her from exercising her legal rights. Harlow's expression when I read the number was the last performance he gave in my courtroom. A quick, controlled flash of disbelief that he swallowed almost immediately, because he understood, finally, that this room was not a place where his reaction held any power. I also informed him that his contradictory testimony, having stated under oath that there was zero contact, then conceding contact after the recording was played, would be referred to the appropriate office for review. He said nothing. I did not need him to. Maya sat quietly for a moment after I closed the file. She was not crying. She was very still, the way a person is still after carrying something heavy for a long time and suddenly being allowed to set it down. I watched her gather her folder, take a breath, straighten in her chair. Before I left the bench, I addressed her directly. "Miss Collins," I said, "you came into this courtroom today because you refused to be silent. That took real courage. And I want you to know what was done to you was wrong. Not complicated, not debatable, wrong." She looked up at me. She nodded once. Her eyes were full, but she held them steady. I heard later that she went back to work within 2 weeks of the hearing. A cosmetics brand had reached out after the case received coverage. She was booked for 3 months straight. She sent a note to my clerk's office. Short, handwritten, neat. "Caleb has his school supplies. The car is fixed. Thank you for listening." I kept that note. There is something I want to say about what this case was really about. It was not about a wrist injury. It was not about one bad morning on a film set. It was not even about one man's arrogance, as real and as costly as that arrogance turned out to be. It was about a system that certain people have learned to trust completely. Not the legal system, but the system of social weight. The system that says if you are prominent enough, connected enough, famous enough, the people you harm will decide on their own that the cost of speaking up is too high. That system works most of the time. It worked on the crew members who watched what happened to Maya and kept their heads down for weeks before finally agreeing to give statements. It worked on the publicist who sent that letter, who was doing the job they were paid to do. It worked on the assistant director who told Maya to be patient before the day began. It depends on the person it hurt staying quiet. It depends on the calculation adding up wrong. It depends on there being no room, no bench, no folder, no recording, where the truth is more powerful than the reputation. My courtroom is one of those rooms, and I want every person watching this, every person who has ever been told to stay quiet, to not make trouble, to consider how much fighting back will cost, to know that. The rooms exist. The truth does not expire. And a smirk, no matter how practiced and how comfortable, is not armor. It is just a face. And faces in this courtroom do not decide anything. Evidence does. If this story reminded you that working people deserve to be protected, leave the word protected in the comments right now. And if someone in your life has ever been afraid to speak up because they didn't think anyone would listen, share this with them today, because someone is always listening.